All right, guys. So we are live, and thank you so much for joining us tonight in this Google Hangout that we have, part of the Google Hangout series for all of our scholars. So if you're joining us from California, Arizona, New York, Florida, Texas, Illinois, or other states, welcome to the Google Hangout. And before we start, I wanted to give a special shout out and thank you to the Citizenship Now team that's with us. Woohoo! Thank you for joining us, Rosie and Alan. You guys are the best, and they're going to be here to help us and give a general idea of some of the information around how to, who are eligible to get a green card. I know some of you have started to ask, but also some of you that want to study abroad and get an advanced parole. They're going to talk a little bit about that. This should not replace legal advice, nor are we going to be able to get into like the weeds of individual cases. So I just wanted to plug that in and put it out there before we started. And then, of course, I want to say a big, big thank you to my partner in justice in this work, Melissa, that is going to be with us today. She's going to talk about what are the different criteria that a scholar needs to have in order for them to use the scholarship money to pay for some of those study abroad programs or study abroad classes. So we'll just get started because we want to get as much information through and get some of your questions. If you have questions, remember you're going to have to use the text-in questions that are part of the Google Hangouts. And as soon as you get them, I'm going to read them. You're going to see me doing this because I have two screens. So bear with us. We're paying attention. But if Rosie and Alan can tell us a little bit about themselves and what they do, and we'll get right now started. So thank you, Alan and Rosie.
Thanks,
you. Gabby.
Hi, I'm Alan Warnick. I'm the director of CUNY Citizenship Now. We're a free immigration law service program sponsored by the City University of New York. We provide free services to all New Yorkers. About 60% of the work we do is helping people become U.S. citizens. The other 40% is helping people get green cards, deferred action, TPS, and other immigration benefits.
And I'm Rosie Eugenio. I'm one of the staff attorneys at CUNY Citizenship Now, and I help people get citizenship, TPS, DACA, and green cards, and I've done many a DACA and quite a few advanced parole lately, so here we are. So I guess we'll just get started.
Go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead, get started.
Great, terrific. So what I'm here to do is to give you, to start out with, a little bit of an overview about the permanent resident process and talk to you about how, even if you have been here undocumented, you might be able to overcome some of the obstacles. But I want to start by holding up this document here that you can get online for free at CUNY, that's CUNY, .edu/citizenship now. And the reason I mention it is because, as Gabby said, we're not going to be able to go into too much detail, but there's a lot of information in this document. It's free, and it's at our website under Publications. And if you think you might qualify for a green card, that's a really good place to get information. But before I go into that, I want to thank Gabby and Melissa and the people at TheDream.Us. We love TheDream.Us. At CUNY. We think it's a terrific program. We have a lot of people, hopefully some of them are listening in today, who are benefiting from the program. So we just think it's terrific. Citizenship Now, we do everything we can to make a special effort to help the people with the scholarship. So if you're in the greater New York area, our service is 100% free to everybody. There's no income guidelines or geographic guidelines. And we're going to tell you about, if you're in other cities, how you might be able to get help. So there's two basic ways that people get green cards, two common ways. One is through family relations, because you have a spouse, a parent, brother or sister, or child who is a U.S. citizen, or in some cases a permanent resident, and through employer sponsorship. If you can show, if your employer can show that there's an unavailability of U.S. workers. So I'm going to talk about each category just real quickly, but then spend a little bit more time talking about how you can overcome the fact that you may have been in the United States undocumented. In the family categories are broken into two groups. We have the immediate relatives of U.S. citizens, the spouse, unmarried child under 21, and parent of a 21-year-old U.S. citizen. And then we have four preference categories for other children of U.S. citizens, the unmarried children of permanent residents, and the brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens. I want to speak a little bit about the marriage case because for your age group, and because of some special benefits that exist for the spouse of U.S. citizens, that's something you really need to know about. If you marry a U.S. citizen, unless you meet one of the particular grounds of ineligibility that Rosie's going to speak about in a minute, there ought to be a path for you to get a green card. So let's say you enter the United States without inspection, that is, you snuck across the border, or you used a phony, let's just say you snuck across the border, let's make it simple, and you marry a U.S. citizen. If you get advanced parole and travel outside of the United States, the Immigration Service is going to consider an entry to qualify you to have your interview here in the United States for your green card. So, you know, Mary is engaged to Tom. Tom is a U.S. citizen. Mary snuck across the border. Mary goes home to visit her sick grandmother. She gets, before she leaves, she gets advanced parole. She comes back to the United States. They marry. In 6 months, she can get her green card because even though she entered without inspection, she can have her interview in the United States. So that's one very popular way in this particular age group that people can get permanent residence. Now let's say you qualify in one of the other categories. Let's say you have a brother or sister who's a U.S. citizen, or let's say you have a job skill in short supply. That is, because of your particular skills or background, work history, you have an employer that cannot find a U.S. worker in your area, qualified, permanent resident U.S. citizen worker to do the kind of work you do. You can qualify for permanent residence. The problem is that if you leave the United States and go home for your green card, which you're going to have to do in one of those other categories, you're going to face a 3 or 10-year bar to permanent resident. But here's a way around that. In some jurisdictions, and you're going to need to talk to an immigration law expert to figure out whether it makes sense for you, in some jurisdictions, you can get advanced parole to go for an interview abroad. Now, I know I'm talking about a lot of stuff that's very complicated, but I want to give you a sense of what questions you should ask when you go to meet with an immigration law expert. So let's say your employer sponsors you because you have a skill in short supply in the United States. And all the paperwork in the United States gets approved, and now you have to go back to, let's say, Ecuador for your green card interview. If you have TPS or you have DACA, you may be able to get advanced. Certainly, if you have TPS, you can get advanced parole, and if DACA, you may be able to get advanced parole to go to your interview in Ecuador. If the consulate grants you your green card, your immigrant visa, well, you come back and you live happily ever after. If your immigrant visa is not granted, you have advanced parole and you come back with advanced parole. So even though you lose the time and expense of the trip, you don't put your immigration status in jeopardy. So these are things, like I said, you're going to have to talk to an immigration law expert. I'm going to you should have received the outline for today's talk, and at the very bottom you will see immigrationlawhelp.org. If you go to that website and you put in your zip code, you'll be able to find a free or low-cost legal service provider in your area. Your handout should also mention some humanitarian ways of getting a green card, asylum. If you've been here for 10 years and you have a parent, spouse, or child who's a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, and that relative is going to suffer unusual and extreme hardship if you have to leave the United States, you may qualify for a green card. Those are very hard to get. U visas, some of you know about SIJ, depending on what state you're in. If you have been abandoned or abused by a parent or parents, for instance, if you're living with an aunt or grandmother or grandfather, you might qualify for CIS if you're not too old. Each state has their own rules. In New York, for instance, you would have to be under 21. Other states, it's 18. And the last thing I want to talk about is the MAVNI program. Now, I'm not much of a militarist, I have to say, so I don't really want to encourage people necessarily to go into the military. But my view is that everybody should have the option and know what that option is. If you are a medical professional, or you have one of the needed languages that the military is asking for, and by the way, Spanish is not one of them, but if you Google MAVNI, M-A-V-N-I, you'll be able to find a list of the needed languages, and you have been in the United States legally for 2 years, that includes TPS and DACA, you can qualify for the MAVNI program. That is, you can enlist in the military, and once you enlist in the military, you're automatically eligible for U.S. citizenship. You can skip the green card part altogether. So let's say Mary decides to join the Army. She speaks Haitian Creole. She passes a language exam. She meets the other criteria. She's been in the United States with DACA or TPS for 2 years. Once she's enlisted in the military, she can immediately apply for her citizenship. And every Army, Navy base around the world and in the United States has a liaison to help people with that citizenship program. So that's all I'm going to say. There's going to be plenty of time for questions. I don't know, plenty of time, but there'll be some time for questions at the end. And so I'm going to stop talking now and let Rosie speak a little bit about grounds of inadmissibility.
All right, thanks, Alan. So Alan mentioned eligibility, and Gabby mentioned the weeds of immigration law. And one of those weeds of immigration law is inadmissibility. And inadmissibility are barriers that prevent you from getting your green card. So even if you're eligible, you still may be inadmissible. And I'm going to just talk. There's quite a few grounds of inadmissibility. I'm just going to talk about 3 of the more common ones. Now, the one that really plays into advanced parole is called the 3 or 10-year bar. It comes from a very complicated, not so great law that was passed in about '97. And what it means is that if someone were to leave lawfully, and that means either came in unlawfully or through the border or overstayed the visa, and they were to depart or leave the United States without any type of authorization like advanced parole, then they would trigger what's called the 3 or 10-year bar. So it's a 3-year bar if you've been unlawfully here between 6 months and a year and you were to depart without authorization. That would be a 3-year bar, and that means you cannot come back for at least 3 years. And then the 10-year bar is if you've been here unlawfully or undocumented for over a year, you're barred from returning to the United States for 10 years. Advanced parole, if you were to apply for advanced parole, get advanced parole, and leave the United States, it doesn't trigger this 3 or 10-year bar. So that's the benefit of applying for advanced parole. There's no fear of being barred for that amount of time. Another really common ground of inadmissibility is criminal, so crimes. Generally, if you're, generally speaking, as a practicing attorney, when I see criminal activity or someone with DACA or TPS or someone who doesn't have lawful status, it drives me crazy because sometimes there are ways to cure it and sometimes there aren't. Most of the time there aren't. Some of the more common ones we see, especially if it's anything related to controlled substances or anything like that, it's really hard. It will almost permanently, there's only one exception for 30 grams of marijuana, but anything else will guarantee that you will not receive a green card in the United States, and some other crimes will prevent you from renewing your DACA. So stay out of trouble is basically what I'm saying. And then the other ground that we see that I've been seeing a lot lately is fraud or misrepresentation. When you apply for DACA or TPS, especially when you apply for DACA, I think that there's this rumor, prevailing thought that you shouldn't disclose exactly how you came to the United States, or maybe that it's better to say that you came one way versus the way that you actually came. It's really important to be as accurate as possible, and if you don't know exactly what to say, to consult a legal professional when you're doing your DACA, or in some cases at this point your DACA renewal. You don't want to say anything that's completely wrong or a lie or misrepresenting your situation, and it may not affect you at this point in time, but later on in the future when you're ready to adjust, it may make that adjustment more difficult, or you may need a waiver for that. For TPS, there is a waiver for some types of fraud or misrepresentation, and that would be done along with your TPS application. So those are just some of the common inadmissibilities or barriers to getting your green card status.
Great. So next we have Gabby. You're going to be talking about the benefits of permanent residence for current DREAM scholarships, right?
That's right. And so a lot of times people come to us and say, oh, I am eligible to apply for a green card. I just got married to my husband, and he's a citizen, but I don't want to lose the scholarship. What do you think I should do? So one of the things that we tell students is that it's up to them to make a decision of what they should do, but they should never choose not to get a green card because they're going to lose the scholarship. And the reason for that is for a couple of things. The first is that we're not going to take the scholarship away from you right away. Eventually, yes, because our scholarship is intended for people that otherwise wouldn't be able to get scholarship money or financial aid. Once you become a green card holder, you are eligible to apply for what is called the Pell Grant. You probably heard it all along the way in high school when people were talking about filling out the FAFSA, right? And that's the financial aid form that colleges use to get money from the federal government. And so if you are a green card holder, you are eligible if you meet the criteria, and there's a certain criteria on how much money you make. But if you met our criteria of the DreamUS, you should be able to meet the FAFSA criteria because our scholarship is also on financial need. So some of the benefits of getting a green card include being able to find jobs that otherwise people with DACA wouldn't be able to. And I want to pause here because people that have DACA have a right to receive employment. There shouldn't be any discrimination. However, there are some programs, like governmental program, that do require either citizenship or somebody having a green card. So don't confuse those two things, because on-campus employment or jobs at a bank, maybe at a fast food restaurant, they shouldn't tell you, oh, you can work here because you have this thing called DACA, or a temporary work authorization. The other thing is that, and also it's not to discourage you, because what we have seen is a lot of people that have gone into, for instance, nursing, and they need special licensing. They've been able to go and fight to be able to get licensed. But it will be so much easier if you have a green card to be able to work in the fields that you want, and especially for people that get licenses. In New York, for instance, a very famous story of a dreamer that just got licensed, right? The state had to fight for the student had to fight the state in order for them to give him his lawyer's license, right? He passed the bar, he went to law school, but because he only had DACA, the state would say, no, we're not going to give this to you. He eventually won. But that just takes away, having a green card takes away sort of that burden that you're going to carry around thinking, will I be licensed? Will I be able to work in my field with DACA? And having a green card, again, you'll be eligible to get some of those licenses that otherwise right now people are still trying to figure out, and state governments are still trying to figure out. And then, of course, the other thing that's really important when you get a green card is that you will be put on a path to citizenship. So depending on who you marry, right? If you do this, for instance, you get a green card through a marriage, right? You can technically, after a certain period of time, and the folks at Citizenship Now will be able to tell you, but depending, right, if your spouse is a citizen, after 3 years, you'll be able to, start your citizenship application. If not, just on your own, after you've had your green card for 5 years, you could start your citizenship application and become a citizen. So there's a lot of benefits. Of course, the other thing is that DACA is temporary. a green card. It's not, right. There are some conditions, and I won't go into that because I'm not an attorney. But it's just I would say a more permanent solution, and also something that, again, we won't take the scholarship away from you right away. What we'll do is we'll give you some time for you to start applying for your FAFSA, to start getting all the financial aid, and get all your stuff in order. And after you have done that is when we tell you, all right, it's time for us to use this money to pay for the scholarship of someone else that wouldn't be able to go to school if it wasn't for those monies. And I'm going to throw it back at you guys to talk about advanced parole.
Thanks, Gabby. So it's 2 years, 9 months if you're married to a U.S. citizen, 4 years, 9 months if you get your green card through somebody else.
You can start the process.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you go about applying for advanced parole. What are the qualifications for applying for advanced parole? And they're a little bit different for people who have DACA and then people who have TPS. I'm going to start with the easier one. If you have TPS, there's very little explanation that you need to have. You just need a reason. So I have TPS, I'm going to visit someone, is a good enough reason. Or I have TPS, I would like to travel, is a good enough reason. And I've pretty much practically written that on some applications, and they do get approved. If you have DACA, however, you have to have one of 3 certain types of purposes in order to get advanced parole to travel. The first category is humanitarian, and what I want you to know about all 3 is that they've been interpreted very broadly, very generously. So don't think that you have to have a very specific. You have to have immediate sick family member, and that's the only way that you're going to get advanced parole. These terms have been interpreted, luckily for us, by USCIS very broadly. So something that might count as humanitarian could be visiting a gravesite for a family member that might have passed away, going to a funeral for a family member or a non-family member, somebody that was just a close family relative, a religious trip, anything that you can maybe explain and document that isn't a vacation. So a vacation is not going to be a humanitarian purpose, but if you have any reason to travel that can be documented, that you can explain, it may be worth your while to try to get advanced parole for that purpose, and it may be accepted as a humanitarian purpose. The other 2, so there's a business purpose, and if you're working for an employer and you can go to a conference or a convention, if you have a big important meeting, you may be able to get advanced parole for that. We've had someone who's a documentary filmmaker who needed to go to a festival abroad to show their documentary, and that was a business purpose. And then the third category is educational purpose, and this is very relevant for you. If you have a study abroad program that you may want to go to, that is an educational purpose. So you would be able to provide information about that program, the length of time that you're going for, and maybe an authorization or a signature from the program director, and you can get advanced parole for that. The other thing to keep in mind is in most jurisdictions or in most areas where you live, you can get advanced parole at your local office if it's an emergency. So you can go and apply the same day, and an officer will review your record and will review your security background, and they will let you know if you can get the advanced parole that same day. And then, but most of the time you're going to be applying over the mail, and that process is right now taking about 3 to 4 months. So you want to have all your documentation in ahead of time, so that you have plenty of time to make arrangements, have the advanced parole approved, have your passport in order, and go. And the other thing to keep in mind is once you're leaving and you're coming back, you want to keep in mind the reason that you stated that you were leaving, because you may be asked by the Customs and Border Patrol officer upon arrival, to explain the reason that you left. So you want to make sure that you remember what is in your paperwork. So those are the qualifications. Some of the risks involved, they are generously approved, but if you are in a situation where you had a prior immigration contact, so an expedited removal, which is what happens at the border, or if you've had an order of removal and you've seen a judge, or you've seen a judge with your parent, you want to be a little bit more cautious about applying for advanced parole. It doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be let back in, but it makes it risky. Situations is probably to try to go back and terminate some of those orders, and you're going to need to consult an immigration professional for that. Some of the other risks are if you have any crime that wasn't disclosed in your DACA applications, or if you have any crimes since the last time you applied, you want to be very careful with those. Again, it'll come up when you try to come back in. So there are some risks. One of the tips that I wanted to give you guys is to number on your generally the DACA related A numbers start with 204, 207, they start with twos. If you see one, if you look at yours and you're citing it's starting with 0, that could be an indication that you had some type of prior immigration contact, and you're going to want to investigate that. So either usually with the help of a legal professional, you're going to want to get Freedom of Information Act requests and see exactly what that contact was. So Freedom of Information Act requests, those are FOIAs. You can get FOIAs from any agency, any government agency, state, local, or federal. One thing that we tend to do is just think of immigration as one big thing. It's just immigration in general, and it is divided up into many components. And so you may not know exactly which part of Homeland Security or immigration has your records, and so you're going to want to consult with a professional to get access to those records. And I'm just going to mention 2 of the different more common FOIAs. One of them is the USCIS, or United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, and that's the service that you apply to get the DACA and to get the TPS. That FOIA is available on their website, uscis.gov/forms, and the form number is G639. You can also Google G-639 and it'll come up. And so by filling out that form and sending in the request, you're going to be able to get access to your immigration file, and in there you might be able to see prior immigration contact. The other thing to mention about that is if you can use a safe mailing address if there's any concerns about the government having access to where you are. A lot of the times the records are going to be under your parents' names or whatever relative you came in with if you came in through the border. I know sometimes parents are afraid of sending in these documents to the government. It is a relatively safe FOIA to do, the USCIS FOIA, and again, you can always use a safe mailing address. The other FOIA, if you know that you've been to immigration court, is the Executive Office of Immigration Review, or EOIR FOIA, and that is, there's no form for it, it is a written request. You can Google EOIR FOIA, and that's just writing a letter with your name, your A number, addressed to the address that is available on the EOIR website for that FOIA, and they will mail you back a CD with your court records. So those are a couple of different tips for getting those records, or if you find that you're in a riskier category for traveling on advanced parole, these are some of the suggested tips that you should follow.
So I have here on my list here, getting free immigration services. I'm just going to emphasize that again. If I could summarize what I said in my introductory presentation on getting a green card, is that if you come into one of the existing categories, family or employment-based immigration, and you don't have a serious criminal record, there's a very good chance that with the help of an immigration law professional, in many cases, it's going to require some substantial high-quality legal work, and many of the people who are part of this, who are hanging out with us today, may not have that kind of financial resource. But pretty much everywhere in the country there are lawyers and not-for-profit agencies who provide free or low-cost services. If you're in the New York area, which we have a large number, we're very proud to say, at CUNY. By the way, you don't have to be part of CUNY, but if you're in the New York area, you can get to one of our offices, go to our website, make an appointment, we'll take care of you. If you are anywhere else in the country, you go to immigrationlawhelp.org, put in your zip code, and you should be able to find someone that could help you. The purpose of my talk was to trigger some questions in your head that will make you think that it's worthwhile to go to the trouble to see one of these immigration law professionals. Melissa, pass it back to you.
Thank you, Ellen. So before we go into our study abroad and our policies with advanced parole, I just want to echo what you said, Ellen, that is our position as well. We don't discourage you or encourage you to apply for advanced parole, but we also really highly recommend that you seek an immigration attorney or an organization that can help explain to you the risk involved in leaving the country. So now let's talk about how and if you can use your scholarship money for the study abroad courses, as some of you have already asked. So you can use your scholarship money to go and study abroad if you meet the following criteria. So the first one being you must be in good academic standing, which means you must have a 3.0 GPA or above. You must be full-time enrolled, which is 12 or more credits. The second type of criteria, the second criteria is that the scholarship money must be used for tuition and fees only. And by this I mean it doesn't have to cost exactly the money doesn't have to be the classes that you will use and study abroad don't have to cost the same, but we will only cover the tuition and fees. That will be the second criteria. The third one is that the study abroad courses are part of your academic plan, and by this we highly encourage you to talk to your student advisors, and just so they sign off that those courses that you are taking are part of your academic plan. The fourth one being is that the study abroad program is within your university, so that it's not a third party. And by this we mean that since we issue the checks to your university, we won't issue any checks to any third parties. So just make sure that it is a program that's being run through your university, even if it's subcontracted or if it's a third party, but that they work with your university, because the payments can get a little messy, and we do require that to be set. So back to you, Gabby. Do you have any other comments?
So all of you should have already received these new policies a couple of months ago. We also send it to all the partner colleges and the student advisors, so they're aware of this policy that we have, and we changed it. It wasn't like this before, and we were actually a little afraid of what would happen if some of you would go study abroad, but we decided that it was going to be up to you to make the decision as adults, and to, you have a lot of good resources like Citizenship Now that's at CUNY that you can go and talk to someone, get some advice, and then make a decision for yourself. So we are going to continue to have very similar Google Hangouts like this one. And now we just want to take some time to see if there are any questions in particular to the information that we have asked. And the way that we're going to be receiving these questions is through the Google Hangout. And so some of you have already started submitting them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read them out loud, and then I'm going to give them to either Alan or Rosie or Melissa to answer. So right now the first question says, for family preference category, my sister's 19 in the Navy. Can I qualify? Also, from USCIS website, these types of requests can take a minimum of 10 years. Is that correct?
So in order for a U.S. citizen to petition for a sibling, he or she must be at least age 21. So she's going to have to reach the age of 21. And yes, it takes 10 to 12 years.
Yeah, 10 to 12.
Depending on the country. For some countries, it could be as long as 20 years. So, It's certainly not a very easy way to get a green card, but it's certainly something that, the sooner you can get it started, those 10 years or 12 years can pass pretty fast sometimes.
Yeah, and if I may add, so when I was working for United We Dream in the deportation defense program, the education on deportation, one of the things that was really helpful to stop people's deportation was to show them that they had family ties. And a lot of times having an application, even if it was still pending, was really important for us to use to say, you shouldn't deport this person. Not that any of you are going to get deported, and, knock on wood that the DACA program continues. But it's kind of like having credit points to your side if you're able to have that. So
long-term investment. Yeah.
Very well put. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so another question is, how long does it take for advanced parole to be processed?
So there's two different ways to seek advanced parole. One of them is as an application through the mail, and that's about 3 to 4 months. So you need to leave yourself a good 3 to 4 months before travel to have the document in hand. And what it is a piece of paper with your photo on it and some words, and it'll tell you the dates exactly that you're authorized to travel and how many times within that date you're allowed to travel. So it could be for a single entry or a single departure, it could be for multiple entries and departures. So that's one. The other one is if it's an emergency, you may be able to file in person at your local USCIS office, and there's an office locator at uscis.gov. But it may or may not be approved that day, depending on what the emergency is. So the best thing to do is to have as much evidence as possible as to what the emergency is and why you need to travel immediately. And if you get approved, they'll issue the document that day. Same document, just different way of getting it.
Bye-bye. So the next question is, hello, I'm a U.S. citizen, married to my wife for over 10 years with a 6-year-old child. My wife is DACA student, and we're thinking of going back to Bolivia, her homeland, on advanced parole. What are the risks of her not being let back in the U.S.?
So our experience is that everybody gets let back in. There's one example that's gotten a lot of notoriety because a person apparently had an outstanding deportation order that wasn't cleared up before she left. But in your situation, I don't see any reason to be fearful. And if your spouse had entered without inspection, and that's why you have not filed for her green card, when she comes back, she can file for something called adjustment of status. And in 4 to 6 months in most areas, and you can find out how long it takes at the USCIS website. But in many parts of the country, in 6 months, she'll have at least a temporary green card, depending how long you've been married, but she will become a permanent resident.
Thank you. So, what evidence is necessary to prove that the marriage is in fact legitimate and not being done solely for immigration benefits?
Well,
a lot.
Well, here's what happens. When you go for your interview in the United States for adjustment status based on the process I just described, both parties, both parties in the marriage, the U.S. citizen and the foreign national, appear together, and they should present information about a joint bank account if they have one, joint credit cards if they have one, very strong evidence if there's letters that go to a common living place from different sources, like one person's paying the electric bill, one person's paying the phone bill, or you have relatives writing to you at the same address. If the examiner is suspicious, he or she will ask questions like, birthdays, your favorite restaurant, things of that nature. How did you meet? How did you meet? If the examiner is not convinced that it's a bona fide or real marriage, the examiner will schedule a second interview, and that interview will be an interview where the couple is separated and ask questions and see if the two lists of questions answers compare. In my experience, that if it's a bona fide marriage, you will pass. Sometimes even if it's not a bona fide marriage, you'll pass. But certainly if it's a bona fide marriage, you'll pass. And also, the things that the things they look at are the things that any of us would look at if they wanted to look at a couple. And the way I explain to people is, if it's the kind of thing where if you had two friends, you'd hook them up on a blind date, then it's the kind of thing where immigration is probably going to look at the couple and say, yeah, this seems like the kind of people that would be a real couple. If you don't meet that criteria, you should make an extra effort to bring evidence. People always want to bring photos. Photos are too easy to take together. But if you have photos with the family of the other of your spouse, that's very persuasive, because usually if it's a phony marriage, you don't introduce your phony spouse to your family. Also,
children, if you have children
if you have
together.
children together, of course. And also vacations out of the city. In other words, in New York, you go to Central Park, you take a photo together. That's not such a big deal. But you go to Los Angeles or Nebraska and you take a photo together and you live in New York. That's sort of more evidence that it's a bona fide marriage. But if it's a real marriage, not to worry, you will pass. If it's not a real marriage, you should worry, because if it's denied, if your petition is denied based on the fact that it's a fraudulent marriage, it may permanently bar you from ever getting a green card. So you should be not that people don't do it and get away with it,
yeah.
But it's something that you should be very cautious about.
Great, thank you. So there's a question on advanced parole. It says, advanced parole for students, is there a limit? For instance, if by miracle I get accepted to medical school in the Caribbean, will I be able to attend on advanced parole for the full 4 years?
Well, here's what I would answer. I don't know of any cases like that. What I would recommend is certainly there's no reason not to apply for it, but I think what we ought to do with that question, Gabby, is maybe we should see if we can put it on a liaison list for a discussion with. Certainly, we have had people go for a year to study abroad.
Generally, they give you the limit is a year, and whether you enter, leave, or depart for a single entry or multiple entry. So at that point where it's regularly basically residing outside the United States, I think that might be, we need to discuss that with other professionals. I think that might be an issue. But it's worth a discussion. I mean, we can put that out, on, like Alan said, on the liaison boards and see if anyone responds.
Yeah, and definitely, and one of the questions that I would have on that is, one of the things that DACA asks you for is continuous presence, right? And so how do you prove continuous presence? Yeah. Okay, let's go.
Don't do that now.
So before I received DACA, my parents filed for asylum. I am 19 years old now and have had DACA for over 2 years. Does previously filing for asylum make it more risky to file for advanced parole?
So I would say generally not. Again, if you get advanced parole, you're going to be brought back into the United States. The only concern I would have, it depends. I would want to look at. I would want to see your parents' asylum claim and what it was based on. If you and your parents wrote that, you would be arrested, that the family would be arrested and tortured at the airport, then there's a serious question of whether it was an honest asylum claim. On the other hand, if the asylum claim is that you could not live safely in your community without harassment, that doesn't mean that you can't make a visit with advanced parole. But in terms of returning to the United States, I'm not worried so much about that. First of all, it's your parents' asylum claim, not yours. So whatever they said or didn't say cannot be attributed to you. But I would just wonder about if your parents ever go forward with a permanent, if they get asylum and they apply for permanent residence or citizenship, I don't know, it could possibly come up in their case.
Okay. Thank you. So there's some questions I'm trying to combine because they're similar. So on the MAVNY program, the MAVY program, there's a question on so programs for licensed physicians, and then it says I've been doing some research, and the Air Force, the Navy and the Air Force don't recruit, and it also says that the Navy program sometime this year is going to be closed, or there's something about the program.
They do cap.
There's
Yeah.
there's two things. One, and it fluctuates like
Year by year.
weekly.
Yeah, it's.
I mean, you know, originally the program was for the Army only. Then all branches of the service were accepting people, but in different numbers. I would have to look at the current data on the cap. I really don't have that information handy. I'm sure you could find it as easy as I can online. But you're correct that there is a cap, and the thing you have to think about is the Army is the branch of the military service that accepts the most people, and they're more hip to the program. So if you're
right.
I'm sorry.
The Air Force may not be.
The Air Force or the Navy may not be as hip to it. So if you want to, I mean, if your main purpose is to get your citizenship, I would look at the Army first.
Army and National Guard, together, those two.
Army and National Guard.
Yeah.
So somebody asked about clarification on the 0 and 1 on the permit, work permit. I did not hear that. Didn't quite understand it.
So it's just kind of a tip or a general guideline. Most of the alien numbers or A numbers that were issued for DACA start with a 2, and so what ends up happening is and this is a little technical, but if you have something that starts with a 0, something like a 094, what it means is that it's possible that you will have had an old immigration file somewhere, and what happened was when you got fingerprinted at some point, either for DACA or DACA renewal, that your current fingerprint was connected with your old file, and that's why you would be issued, especially between your initial DACA and your renewal DACA, that's why you would have been issued a different number. It's just a guideline. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's something that we've seen. So, don't take it as gospel that you have something, a prior immigration contact, if your number starts with 0, but it's something to investigate. You might want to do your FOIA. And I would just say start with your USCIS FOIA and see what ends up coming out from that. And then if you need to investigate further, then go to Law Help and see if you can get assistance with that. Or if you need assistance with the FOIA, go to Law Help and get an attorney to help you.
Right. So we'll take a few more questions. This one says, hello, I have been with my husband for 7 years, and I have a 1-year-old. We always go to Florida to see his family in Florida. I don't understand the 3 and 10-year bar.
Okay, so the 3 and 10-year bar only applies if you're leaving the United States. So when you travel to Florida, you're still in the United States. The 3 and 10-year bar would not apply to you.
And let me just say, it also doesn't apply if you get advanced parole. Right. So I think the point about the 3 and 10-year bar, don't leave the country without advanced parole, and that includes Canada. So you wouldn't want to go drive across the border to Canada without advanced parole. If you have advanced parole, you don't have to worry about it.
Great. Let me see. Some of these are coming in, and it's hard to, And the number that you have to look at to see if it starts with a 0, it's the alien number, because somebody was asking if that's a Social Security number.
No, not the Social. So it will be on your work authorization that you received with your DACA, the work authorization. I think, if I remember correctly, it just says A number, USCIS A number on it, the current versions of those cards. They just say USCIS A number, and it's a 9-digit number.
Okay. Thank you. So let me see. One question that we get often is, can I travel to Puerto Rico with DACA?
So you don't really need DACA to go to Puerto Rico, but what happens in Puerto Rico that's different than other parts of the United States is that they will inspect people there, and you should just make sure that you have all your documentation that you have DACA, right? Make sure you have your card with you, and that so that you can show that at the airport. But you shouldn't need advanced parole to go to Puerto Rico.
So another question is, my wife and I once met a lawyer that filed for a DACA, and he also filed for a change of status at that time. She was denied the change of status because they didn't see her approval inspection, but her DACA was approved. Does that mean she has an order of removal?
No, probably not.
Probably not.
What happens is very often when a person applies for permanent residence and they deny the application, the officer has the authority or the option of sending it for removal proceedings or not. It's extremely unlikely in this case if the person qualified for DACA or was applying for DACA that they would have the case sent for removal proceedings. If you're concerned about it, I would file a Freedom of Information Act request and you'll be able to.
You can check the EOIR hotline too with the alien number, which I didn't write down. There's a hotline that the immigration court maintains called the EOIR hotline. It's an 800 number. I did not write it down, but I might Google it really quickly. But or Alan will Google it really quickly. It's an 800 number that you can call and enter that alien number that was part of that petition, because that may be different from the alien number that is on the DACA approval. So, and so you check if there's two or if there's one, you would check both. And once you put in the number, the system will tell you if there's any, if there was any proceeding. So if the system starts spelling out your name, that means that there was a case filed with the immigration court. And then you can press the different options to hear, the date, what the result was, or things like that. So
let me give you the number.
Yes.
It's 1-800-898-7180. And it's an automated system, so you don't have to be afraid. It'll ask you to punch in your AIN number. You punch in your AIN number, and if there's no file on you, they'll tell you they have no file on you. But the other thing I would say to this couple is that the reason the application for permanent residence was denied, what we call an application for adjustment of status, is because the foreign national entered without inspection, that is, did not have permission to come to the United States. I believe it was a she. If she travels with advanced parole, that would be corrected because the advanced parole would be considered a lawful entry, and now she's eligible to apply for her green card, which is a perfect example of what I was talking about at the very beginning of this presentation.
Great. So somebody, we'll take this would be the last question, and Alan, if you can, somebody's also asking what is the website to make an appointment to go see you guys at Citizenship Now. But the question before that I wanted to ask, where did it go? Okay. If I don't have any relatives or someone to marry to get a green card, can I apply using DACA, or do I need to have someone to apply for me?
DACA does not currently create a path to permanent residence. Someday in the future, it might, but it does not now. So you're going to have a relative, or you're going to have an employer, but in order for an employer to sponsor you, they have to go through a very rigorous process to determine whether there's a qualified U.S. permanent resident, citizen, or refugee, or asylee worker who could fill your position. So it has to be a highly skilled position, and you have to be qualified to fill that position. For CUNY Citizenship Now, and I'll warn you that this is a very busy time for us, and actually the week of the 25th to the 29th, all our offices are going to be closed. But in order to make an appointment, you go to cuny.edu, that's cuny.edu/Citizenship Now, all one word, and there you will see a list of our centers where you can go for service. And also we're in 30 city council offices throughout New York City, and if what you want is simply a consultation, you can go to any of those 30 offices. We look forward to helping you. Again, all our service is 100% free, and you can even come from somewhere else. You don't have to be in New York, but you have to get here. Right now, unfortunately, we do not offer online services. We'd like to someday in the future. And if any of you are, in any field of study where you're going to become rich, don't forget TheDream.Us. Don't forget CUNY Citizenship Now, because all it takes for money, and we can do online services. Don't forget the people you met on the way out.
Yes, and all of you sign scholar commitments that say that, once you have a chance or opportunity, it doesn't have to be until then, but even then, that you'll pay it forward and help some folks out. So if any of you strike good luck, win the lotto, or start making good money once you guys get employed, yes, don't forget us. All right. Well, thank you so much, Alan and Rosie, for your time and your help. Thank you so much, Melissa, for the information on advanced parole. This will get recorded, so if there were some things that you missed, don't worry. We're going to send out an email with the recording and with some of the websites and information that we got. And for those 2 questions that went unanswered, we're going to send those to Alan and Rosie to get them out there to other experts and see what they say and what they think. And whatever the answers are, we'll share with all of you as well. So thank you so much. For those of you who are in the East Coast and Central Coast, good night. For those of you who are in California and Arizona, thank you so much for joining us. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.